West Virginia is America's worst state. We'll find out why, and hopefully also find out what the hell this podcast is all about on episode 1 of Ask 5 Whys. Hey everyone, and welcome to Ask 5 Whys. I'm your host, Mitch Turk. This is episode 1, aka the explainer episode. So to get all of you on the same page as quickly as possible, 5 Whys is a problem-solving exercise in the style of the Socratic method, and it's been increasingly embraced by progressive management cultures ever since the concept was introduced about a half-century ago. Now, its strength lies in finding the root cause and cutting through all the usual biases and finger-pointing of more convenient arguments. It's the simplicity and versatility of this exercise that makes it so incredibly useful. That is, when you hear anyone present a statement, you ask, why? Once they offer an explanation, you again ask, why? You do this in succession 5 times, 10 times, however many times you like. But in any given scenario, you will reach a point where the subject outruns their prejudices and echo chamber babble, and is forced to challenge their own train of thought. From that point forward, breakthroughs often arise, and that's how the 5 Whys work. It's a great tool for its intended purpose, but I've always loved 5 Whys for its ability to tear down so-called experts and inject a healthy dose of skepticism into any full-throated argument. That's what I'm going for with this podcast. I want Ask 5 Whys to serve as a reminder that we know nothing, that every conclusion we make is a surrender to a guess, to the infinite universe of doubt which surrounds us. I want it to remind us that causation is a myth, that the smartest people in the room are 7-year-olds who refuse to stop asking why, and as a reward, we teach them to dumb it down and stop asking so they can function like the rest of us. That's a practice worth challenging, especially when you consider that we as a species may have gotten further with a communication style rooted in questions rather than statements. Now, you may have surmised that hosting a podcast where I get to unravel people's precious beliefs simply by asking why is a bit convenient. It means, of course, that I don't need to know a damn thing about the topic at hand to corner my guests, and that's just not fair to them. So, in the interest of transparency, our very first hot seat guest on Ask 5 Whys will be me. Of course, that means we need a replacement host for today, preferably someone well-versed in calling out BS and breaking down arguments. I'm thinking an attorney. I'm thinking a handsome attorney.
Hi, I'm Len Gray.
Shit, not him. Len Gray is the founding attorney at Gray, PLLC, and happens to be a personal friend. As the latter, I trust him with my life. As the former, I trust him with this episode. One more test here. Talking like normal people, having a lot of fun, good times with volume.
I love good times. I love good times and I love volume.
All right. How do you
Why?
feel? Well, Len, thank you very much for inviting me to your humble office. It's also a horrendous place to conduct a podcast.
Well, Mitch, I'm glad you're coming in with all sorts of constructive criticism.
I expect total failure. But, hey, New York City, we're both in a rush, as everyone is. I've been traveling. I don't have any good gear. You're soaking wet. You have no socks on. I'm not going to ask how that occurred, but I think this is great. I'm really pleased with how this is working out right here.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
No.
You look extremely comfortable.
Right now at the moment I'm feeling great.
Seductively comfortable.
Yeah, other than my wet pants. Okay, Mitch, so how's this podcast supposed to work? Does the host, and by the way, am I the host or are you the host?
Well, yeah, therein lies the rub. See, you're the host right now. They know that already.
They know that I'm the host.
Yeah.
So this is my podcast.
Yeah, you can derail it however you like.
Yeah, you're totally screwed here. Okay. So I tell you what your argument is.
In theory, and in the future, yes, that's what's going to happen.
Okay. And then from there, I ask you why 5 times, and we see where it goes.
Exactly.
Can I object at any point if I feel like you've dodged the very simple one-word question?
Yeah, no, please do that. And that's part of the reason I've brought you here today as an attorney to keep me honest. I don't want any of the guests in the future skating by with like a cognitive bias or any kind of lazy answer, for sure.
There's just so much pressure, Mitch. There's a wide audience that's going to hear this, and
What are you saying about my audience?
I don't want to disappoint your fans. So what topic are we talking about today?
Yeah, so luckily for me and for you, I've kind of picked my own topic.
This is not about you living in a van, though.
It's not about me living in a van, but it is about my travels,
Okay.
which are kind of top of mind right now, and it is something that I think is maybe an interesting introduction into how this ought to play out in a way that doesn't end up with someone crying and running home.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In that case, then, tell me what the argument is.
Okay. West Virginia is America's worst state.
Why?
Yeah, so pick like any metric you want out of the hat of quality of life or desirability, job creation, health and wealth, education, tourism, cultural diversity, net migration. Like in almost all measures of what makes a place appealing, West Virginia is somewhere in America's basement or dead last.
Why?
Because there's no economic growth to drive those factors.
But why is there no economic growth?
Well, historically, the wealth generated by laborers hasn't flowed back into their communities.
Why?
Most of West Virginia's land and resources were owned by foreign interests who merely extracted the wealth.
Why?
Because imperialism always wins, I guess. Yeah, I mean, the land possessed valuable natural resources at a time when there was little local power to protect it.
So what you're telling me is that the reason West Virginia is the worst state in America is because it was extremely valuable and it couldn't fight to defend itself.
I suppose that's what I'm saying, yeah.
And so in other words, the rest of America bullied West Virginia, and then you came along and kicked it when it was down.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So Mitch, I'm going to throw in a sixth why. Why?
Why did I do that?
Why are you kicking poor West Virginia when it's down?
Let's take this opportunity to reflect.
Okay.
Okay.
So Mitch, we've been talking for a while now. And
Here or just as friends?
Just in life.
Okay.
In life. Over the last several years.
Yeah.
So there was one why I asked you earlier that went in one direction, and I'd like to take it in another direction.
Sure.
Earlier I said, why is there no economic growth
Right.
in West Virginia? The other direction I'd like to go, why is economic growth the metric you're choosing to focus on in deciding that West Virginia, again, your words, is the worst state in America?
Yeah, that, totally fair. It's got wonderful natural resources. It's got world-class caving, whitewater rapids, some of which I've partaken in. Seneca Rocks, beautiful area. It's got great history. Harper's Ferry is a whole Civil War, site of record. Yeah, so that's a fair point. Like, why do we immediately jump to the idea of economic success as a gauge of overall success?
That's, I don't know. Maybe it's the capitalist in me. I don't know. I don't know that I could say for sure. But I guess I would say, am I visiting or am I living there? Because if I'm living there, I don't know how much of the nature, or the cuisine plays a role so much as my ability to, hold down a job and not have cancer and, send my kids to school and also not have kids when I'm 12 and things like that, So maybe that's why I went with that direction. Maybe I'm just choosing to beat up on it, intentionally and taking the low road. But
so let's go back to actually something where the topic of economic growth led you, and that was the foreign interest problem.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, where it came from, why it's a big deal?
Yeah. So this is super interesting. This is actually what got me interested in researching more of this rich tapestry that is West Virginia's history. So I had a friend kind of give me a little background on this at one point, and then I started researching it. And the number that stuck out to me, or the historical point that stuck out to me, was that as early as 1810, 93% of West Virginia's land was owned by absentee landowners. So in part that was like England, but in that vein, we're also talking about other states. We're talking about Virginia, very much so. West Virginia at one point seceded from Virginia, so Virginia, New York, North Carolina, Kentucky, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. All of these places at one point, and still do, a lot of them, own a ton of the resources and the land in West Virginia. And that's, I think, it's huge, obviously. There's also a really interesting parallel there to kind of the rent-seeking relationships that we see in a lot of the cities and towns right now that a lot of people are up in arms about. And the idea that you're not pumping any growth back into the community. You're just, siphoning off the funds. It actually has I think a really strong parallel, because a lot of the, low income areas where people are rent seeking are getting their funds through, or their rent through government programs, right? So it's the same gist of the government subsidies supporting people who don't actually live in this area or have a stake in the success of that area. And so the money's just being funneled out to those people. Yeah.
All right. Well, so these absentee landowners, sure that they weren't living there, so maybe they do not have a direct day-to-day interest in seeing the community being a livable place. But ultimately, unless really it is they want to strip all the natural resources on and move to the next town, and maybe that's it, but assuming that they want to have a continuing relationship and a profitable relationship, isn't there some incentive on their part to want these places to be livable places that workers will want to continue to populate?
Yeah, like that. I find that really curious, because it should be pretty obvious that this is a sinking ship, right? Like, mining an area for its resources is not a sustainable, to some degree it's not sustainable. Now, maybe at the time when it started, I don't know, maybe they thought it was sustainable for hundreds and hundreds of years, and, good enough for me, because I'm the guy who runs this place, and as long as it's still cranking when I die, I'm happy. Maybe that's the mentality. But it does seem pretty clear from the way the communities were set up, especially in West Virginia, that it really wasn't the case. West Virginia is kind of like America's capital of company stores and company scripts, which I think the average American knows a lot more about slavery than they do company towns and truck systems. Which, of course, is not to say that they're the same thing, because these are immigrants who willingly came to work for this company, right? Under the idea that it would be a better life, and so on and so forth. Not to be compared with the idea of getting thrown on a ship and taken over to work for someone and being paid nothing and not having the freedom to leave. These people obviously had the freedom to leave for greener pastures, except for the fact that a company town is basically a town that is stood up by the company itself. So there's usually like a store and a church, and all the revenues that come through those operations are owned by the company. And in turn, the currency which you receive often for your work, which would be called a scrip, is really just a currency that is created by your company and only works for your company. So there's no incentive for the company to be building anything. There's no competition for anything to be occurring outside of those walls. And therefore, you're sitting there in a kind of, indentured situation where, you go to work for a day, you get paid in these monopoly monies that are no good anywhere else other than at the company store, where the company has a monopoly and therefore can charge whatever it likes. And then you just go back to work the next day. In fact, I always found it kind of interesting to know that employees had to buy a lot of their own gear, like explosives or helmets, things like that. Again, a lot of times from these stores. Not so much in other states. Definitely the case in West Virginia, I think, if I recall correctly, foremost in West Virginia. So it certainly was the case that, these folks, while they could technically leave, there were no other jobs to get in the town, and there was no way to get out of town. So, and you'd be leaving of course, your family and friends. So, what purpose was there to doing anything other than working for whatever amount the company agreed to pay you?
So, as with everything in 2018 America, this goes back to politics. And specifically in this case, Donald J. Trump.
Duck. Sorry. I thought it was Donald Duck. I don't watch much TV.
Clearly, he was a fan favorite in West Virginia. I'm somewhat skeptical, as I think most left-leaning folks are, that the promises that Trump has made directed towards folks like the West Virginians that elected him are real, and that they're going to be followed through.
There's two parts. There's an interesting fact, which I'll address in a second, which is I recognize you as being disenfranchised, unhealthy, needing help, a helping hand. What? You laughing because I burped?
Yeah.
I thought maybe if I directed this way, it'd be all right.
They're just coming. Okay. Sorry.
That's probably for the best, because it was starting to heat up in my nose. So I was like, this is going to go poorly real quick. All the dignity's going to be gone. Yeah, so I think maybe the easiest, and this has been analyzed to hell and back, right? But maybe the two easiest ways for the purposes of this podcast to break down the great Trump promise to the folks like West Virginians and Appalachia in general is, one, I recognize you. You've been disenfranchised. You've been manipulated. You are down on your luck. You need a helping hand. That is a fact. It's undeniable that these people do represent the same kind of disenfranchised, lost, manipulated working class folks who liberals and Democrats are fighting to support, and yet somehow they got missed in that. So he represented those people very well in that sense, right? The promise he made, which is I'm bringing coal jobs back, is really, if you're at all educated on the idea of it, it's a blatant statement that I am bringing coal opportunity back to large corporations and conglomerates and politicians and all the elites who were screwing you over for the past century and a half. I'm bringing that back. I'm not bringing anything back to you. Go screw yourself. But I'm bringing back stuff for my cronies. And this is another point that I found really interesting when I really dug into this stuff was there's this organization called the Appalachia Regional Commission, the ARC. It was started by either Lyndon Johnson or JFK, and it's basically a recognition that mining the resources of a land is not a long time concept, right? It's not something that can sustain. So what are we going to do? How are we going to bring these folks back into the fold of society? How are we going to make them successful again? So helping with infrastructure, helping to build up the economy through job programs and job retraining, upskilling, all of this stuff that that ought to be sought out and desired by those communities, right? That's what this program is supposed to do. It also works in a way that is kind of almost hysterically similar to Trump's infrastructure program, or plan at least, which is federal dollars, so dollars paid by you and me are going into Appalachia. The rest of it to be covered by state and local entities who are, putting forth the money to actually make it a better place to live and a better economy, right? It's basically the same exact format as Trump's transportation infrastructure plan. Trump attempted to defund it to bring the funding to zero, despite the fact that it already received a huge boost, a historically huge boost from Obama. And, you know, had he left it alone, that would have been fine, right? It's like it's still the largest amount of funding they've had to date for such, you know, things as infrastructure and upskilling, things like that for these communities. This community who supported Trump, you know, by and large more than any other community in the region, or at least in a more transformative way that won him the election, this, you know, the whole Appalachia. So he fought to defund that. That is like, to me, that is a mind-boggling concept that anyone with a decent grasp of what's going on there should say, you know, why would you do that? This is definitely going against the idea of it.
So why didn't they act, or why don't they see it?
This is where we get into, you know, what ought to be very familiar to liberals who are fighting, you know, the good fight against just calling disenfranchised, low-income, manipulated folks products of their own behavior, right? This is where it ought to be blatantly clear to them why this is happening. Like, why would you be in an environment where you've been manipulated by elites and corporations for such a long time, and now that there's any kind of funding going into to fixing that from outside sources, someone's trying to take it away? Why would you look at that and say, yeah, that's fine? I mean, it can only be a result of you know, having the education that you need, the resources that you need, the exposure to the rest of the world that you need, cut off from you for so long. So you kind of get this Dunning-Kruger effect, which is it's prevalent in a lot of these, you know, environments where the people don't have enough education to know that they shouldn't be proud and yearning for the days when they were still being manipulated. And there's a real irony, I think, in that dynamic between West Virginians and the powers that be, which helps to explain the relationship. That is that stifling education didn't breed rebellion. It bred dependence.
So, Mitch, I think that this wraps us up. What have you learned today?
I've learned to bring an extra pair of socks for you wherever you go. I'm sick of looking at those feet. Yeah, you know, I think in researching it, what I learned that really struck a chord with me was pick whatever your stereotype is, right? Like the gun-toting conservative with a Confederate flag on their truck in West Virginia is the same person as like the single black mom in New Orleans who is being marginalized by her government or the politicians that she has to deal with. It's like these are very much the same people. They certainly came about their lives and their current situations in some different ways, but as far as needing to support them and understand their situations and empathize with them and help them, I mean, education, resources, infrastructure, it's the stuff that both of these groups need. In fact, I shouldn't even say both. See, you know, I get caught up in this whole, like, it's red versus blue, it's left or it's right, it's whatever, and I'm not even someone who votes either way. But any of these folks who have just been victims of America's experiments, let's leave it at that. Let's even say there's no one necessarily to blame. It's just the experiments of capitalism, the experiments of the new world. You know, that we try things out. We should have the decency to say when they're not working in the long term, and we should take a longer view. Yeah, that's the rich tapestry that is West Virginia.
Mitch, thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. I guess thanks for having me on my show today, allowing me to spout off.
This is going to be on Forbes?
No. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mitch.
Be well.
That's all for this episode of Ask Five Whys. Please do all the things that make podcasts famous. Subscribe, give us a great rating, make busts of our likenesses out of cream cheese, etc. And don't forget, you can play Ask 5 Whys at your leisure, thanks to a text app we built to replace me at a fraction of the cost. Just send any opinion you hold dear to the number 646-355-1358, and our text bot will gladly ask you why until your phone runs out of storage. We see the conversations come through, and if we like them, we'll feature them on our Twitter handle, @Ask5Whys. If it's really juicy, we may just invite you on the show to rap with us. Until next time, question everything. Ask 5 Whys is produced by Mitch Turk, and the music is by Ben Montgomery. Thanks for listening.